The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither was ready to cross. Kyle Flores sitting on one end of the couch while Wayne Peterson remained frozen in the doorway, his hand still gripping the frame as if it could anchor him to something solid. The movie credits rolled across the television screen, casting shifting shadows across Kyle's face. But Wayne couldn't look away from the way the light caught the uncertainty in his roommate's eyes. "Kutpan," Kyle said, his voice barely above a whisper. Wayne's heart hammered against his ribs with such force he was certain Kyle could hear it from across the room. 3 hours ago, they had been nothing more than roommates who occasionally shared takeout and complained about their respective dating lives. Now something fundamental had shifted between them, something that made the air feel electric and dangerous and full of possibility. The kiss still burned on Wayne's lips, a phantom sensation that refused to fade. He could still taste the salt from Kyle's tears, could still feel the desperate way his roommate's fingers had tangled in his shirt when Wayne had finally given in to the magnetic pull that had been building between them for months. But to understand how they had arrived at this moment, sitting in the wreckage of everything they thought they knew about themselves, Wayne's mind drifted back to earlier that evening, when Kyle had knocked on his bedroom door with an expression Wayne had never seen before. "Hey," Kyle had said, shifting his weight from foot to foot in that way he did when he was nervous, his fingers playing with the hem of his favorite gray sweater. "I know this might sound weird, but do you want to just chill tonight? Maybe watch something?" The request itself wasn't unusual. They had spent plenty of evenings together, sprawled on opposite ends of their second-hand couch, arguing over what to watch or sharing commentary about whatever ridiculous reality show happened to be on. But there had been something different in Kyle's tone, something vulnerable and almost desperate that made Wayne's chest tighten with concern. Quote 4. Wayne had asked, setting aside the book he'd been reading, giving Kyle his full attention. He noticed the way Kyle's shoulders were drawn tight, the telltale signs of stress that Wayne had learned to recognize over their 2 years of living together. Kyle had run a hand through his dark hair, a gesture Wayne had cataloged as one of his tells for when he was struggling with something he couldn't quite articulate. "Ashley broke up with me." The words hit Wayne like a physical blow, not because he was surprised, but because of the complex tangle of emotions they unleashed. Relief, guilt, hope, and something dangerously close to boredom all crashed together in his chest. He had watched Kyle's relationship with Ashley Sanders deteriorate over the past few months, had listened to his roommate's increasingly frustrated phone calls, and witnessed the way Kyle's shoulders seemed to carry more attention after every date. "Good hours," Kyle continued, his voice hollow. Quote 7. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments." "I'm sorry, man," Wayne had said, and he meant it, even as part of him celebrated silently. "Do you want to talk about it?" Kyle had shaken his head, then seemed to reconsider. "Actually, yeah, maybe, but not right now. Right now, I just want to forget about everything and watch something mindless with my best friend." Best friend, the word should have been comforting, should have settled into the familiar groove they had worn over the 2 years they had lived together. Instead, they felt like a knife turning in Wayne's chest, a reminder of the careful line he had been walking for months, pretending that his feelings for Kyle were purely platonic, while his heart hammered every time their hands brushed, reaching for the same bowl of popcorn. They had settled on some action movie neither of them particularly cared about, Kyle curling into the corner of the couch with a throw pillow clutched against his chest like armor. Wayne had tried to focus on the explosions and car chases flickering across the screen, but his attention kept drifting to his roommate, to the way Kyle's profile looked carved from marble in the blue light, to the small crease between his eyebrows that appeared whenever he was lost in thought. Wayne found himself memorizing details he had no right to notice. The way Kyle absently chewed on his lower lip when he was thinking, the soft sound he made when he shifted positions, the way his eyelashes cast shadows on his cheekbones in the television's glow. It was torture and heaven all at once, being this close to someone he wanted so desperately while knowing that wanting him was a betrayal of their friendship. Halfway through the movie, Kyle had started talking. Not about Ashley, not about the breakup, but about everything else. About how he felt like he'd been sleepwalking through his life for the past year, going through the motions of being happy without actually feeling it. about how he kept waiting for something to click, for some moment of clarity that would make everything make sense. Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life? Kyle had asked, his voice soft and contemplative. Like you're playing a role you never auditioned for? Wayne's breath had caught in his throat. The question was so close to his own internal struggles, so perfectly articulated, that for a moment he wondered if Kyle could somehow read his mind. Kyle had said, shifting on the couch so he was facing Wayne more directly. Quote upbunding. Wayne's heart had started beating faster, recognizing something in Kyle's words that felt dangerously close to his own experience of hiding his sexuality, of pretending to be interested in conversations about women, while his attention was entirely captured by the man sitting next to him. Wayne had said carefully, quote 17, quote teen, Kin had said, his eyes lighting up with recognition. Quote 9, the conversation had continued in that vein for what felt like hours, both of them speaking in careful metaphors and hypotheticals, dancing around truths that felt too dangerous to voice directly. Wayne had found himself sharing things he had never told anyone about the loneliness that seemed to follow him even in crowded rooms, about the way he sometimes felt like he was watching his life from outside himself. Kyle had admitted, his voice barely audible over the movie's soundtrack. Like everyone else got some manual for how to be happy, and I missed the distribution day. There's nothing wrong with you, Wayne had said with such fierce conviction that Kyle's eyes had widened in surprise. Kyle had asked, and something in his tone had made Wayne's pulse quicken. Because sometimes I look at you and you seem so sure of who you are, so comfortable in your own skin. I envy that. The irony was almost laughable. Wayne, who spent most of his waking hours in a state of low-level panic about his feelings for his straight roommate, comfortable in his own skin. If Kyle only knew the truth, the careful mental gymnastics Wayne performed daily to maintain their friendship, while his heart quietly shattered every time Kyle brought home a new girlfriend. I'm not as sure as I seem, Wayne had said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Trust me. Kyle had studied his face for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. What aren't you sure about? The question had hung between them like a loaded gun. Wayne could have deflected, could have made some joke about career uncertainty or the general anxiety of being in his 20s. Instead, he had found himself trapped in Kyle's gaze. Those dark eyes that seemed to see straight through every carefully constructed wall Wayne had built around his feelings. Go to 29, Wayne had said finally, his voice rough with honesty he hadn't intended to share. Like what? The movie had reached some climactic action sequence, explosions and gunfire filling the silence. But neither of them was watching anymore. Kyle had shifted closer on the couch, close enough that Wayne could smell his shampoo, that familiar scent that had become synonymous with home in Wayne's mind. Quote 31. Wayne had said, the words falling into the space between them, like stones into still water. Quote 32. Kyle's voice had been barely a whisper, and Wayne had seen something in his eyes that made his heart stutter, something that looked almost like hope. That was when everything had changed. Wayne had looked at Kyle, really looked at him, and seen not just his roommate or his best friend, but the person he had been quietly, desperately in love with for longer than he cared to admit. And in Kyle's eyes, he had seen something that made him think, for the first time, that maybe his feelings weren't as one-sided as he had believed. I want, Wayne had started, then stopped, the words catching in his throat like thorns. Tell me, Kyle had said, and he had reached out, his fingers brushing against Wayne's hand where it rested on the couch between them. The contact had been electric, sending shockwaves up Wayne's arm and straight to his heart. I want to be honest with you, Wayne had said, his voice steadier than he felt. About everything. About how I feel when you walk into a room and it's like someone turned on all the lights. About how I lie awake at night, listening to you move around in the kitchen and feeling grateful just to share the same space. About how every time you bring someone home, it feels like someone is slowly tearing my heart out of my chest. Kyle's eyes had widened, his lips parting in surprise, but he hadn't pulled his hand away. If anything, his fingers had tightened around Wayne's, anchoring them both to this moment of terrible, wonderful honesty. Quote 37. Kyle had breathed, and there was something in the way he said his name that made Wayne's entire world tilt on its axis. I know you're straight, Wayne had continued, the words tumbling out in a rush now that the dam had broken. I know this probably makes things weird between us, and I'm sorry for that. I never meant for it to happen, but I can't pretend anymore that you're just my roommate or just my friend. You're so much more than that to me, and I needed you to know, even if it ruins everything. Kyle had been quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of Wayne's hand, a gesture so intimate it made Wayne's breath catch. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft and uncertain. What if I told you I don't think I'm as straight as I thought I was? The words had hit Wayne like lightning, illuminating corners of possibility he had never dared to explore. What? I've been thinking about this for weeks, Kyla had said, his free hand running through his hair again, about why none of my relationships feel right, why I always feel like I'm acting when I'm with Ashley or any of the girls I've dated, about why the only time I feel like myself is when I'm here, with you. Wayne's heart had been hammering so hard he was surprised it didn't burst from his chest. Kyle, I keep thinking about what it would be like, Kyle had continued, his voice growing stronger with each word, to kiss someone and feel like I was coming home instead of just going through the motions. To touch someone and have it mean something instead of just being expected. And, Wayne had managed to ask, though his voice was barely functional. Kyle had looked at him then, really looked at him, and Wayne had seen his own longing reflected back in those dark eyes. And I keep thinking about you. The admission had hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Wayne had felt as if he were standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that once he stepped forward, there would be no going back to the careful friendship they had built. Can I ask you something? Kyle had said, his voice soft and uncertain. Wayne had nodded, not trusting himself to speak. When you think about kissing me, what does it feel like? The question had been so direct, so honest, that it had taken Wayne's breath away. Quote Fautuan. He had said without hesitation. Quote shot two. Kyle's eyes had fluttered closed for a moment, and when he opened them again, there was a new resolve there, something that made Wayne's pulse quicken with anticipation and terror. Quote, Kyle had said, and then he had been moving, closing the distance between them on the couch until they were close enough that Wayne could count the flecks of gold in his eyes. Quote, Wayne had asked, even as every cell in his body screamed at him to close the remaining distance between them. Quote, Kyle had whispered, and then his hand had been cupping Wayne's face, his thumb brushing across his cheekbone with devastating gentleness. The first touch of Kyle's lips against his had been tentative, questioning, as if Kyle were asking permission even as he took what he wanted. Wayne had responded instinctively, his hands finding Kyle's waist, pulling him closer as the kiss deepened into something desperate and necessary. Kyle had tasted like the coffee they had shared earlier, in something uniquely him, something Wayne wanted to memorize and carry with him always. When Kyle's tongue had traced the seam of his lips, Wayne had opened for him without hesitation, a soft sound escaping his throat that made Kyle's grip on his face tighten. They had kissed until they were both breathless, until the movie had ended and the room had fallen into relative darkness, broken only by the glow of the television screen. When they finally broke apart, Kyle had rested his forehead against Wayne's, both of them breathing hard. Kyle had whispered, his voice full of wonder. Quote 57. Wayne had agreed, his hand still resting on Kyle's waist, afraid that if he let go, this moment would dissolve like a dream. That felt, Kyle had trailed off, seeming to search for words. Right? Wayne had supplied, and Kyle had nodded emphatically. So right, like puzzle pieces clicking into place. They had sat like that for a while, foreheads touching, sharing breath and space, and the weight of this new understanding between them. Wayne had felt as if his entire world had been rearranged, as if someone had taken all the scattered pieces of his life and suddenly shown him how they were meant to fit together. I'm scared, Kyle had admitted eventually, his voice small and vulnerable. Of what? Of this, of changing everything between us, of not knowing how to be this person I think I might actually be. Wayne had understood completely. The fear was there for him too, a cold knot in his stomach that whispered warnings about ruined friendships and complicated living situations. But stronger than the fear was the certainty that this was right, That Kyle in his arms felt like coming home after a long journey. We don't have to figure it all out tonight, Wayne had said, pressing a soft kiss to Kyle's temple. Does it a quote on and Wayne had asked gently, quote 60. Kyle had pulled back enough to meet his eyes, and Wayne had seen something shift in his expression, a new kind of courage taking root. Quote 69. Quote 70. Kyle had smiled then, the first real smile Wayne had seen from him all evening. Quote 71. They had kissed again, slower this time, savoring the newness of it, the permission to touch and taste and explore. Wayne had felt as if he were discovering a new language, one spoken in soft sighs and gentle touches, in the way Kyle's fingers tangled in his hair, and the small sound he made when Wayne's lips found the sensitive spot just below his ear. When they had finally pulled apart for the second time, Kyle had looked around the living room as if seeing it for the first time. Quote 72. Wayne had followed his gaze, taking in the familiar space that somehow felt completely different now. The couch where they had shared countless casual evenings, the coffee tables scattered with their respective books and empty mugs, the television still glowing softly in the corner. Everything looked the same, but the energy between them had shifted so fundamentally that it felt like stepping into an alternate universe. Code 7, Wayne had said, and the words had felt like a promise. Kyle had nodded, something settling in his expression, a peace Wayne had rarely seen there. Quote 74. They had stayed up talking until nearly 3 in the morning, curled together on the couch in a way that would have been impossible just hours earlier. Kyle had told him about the doubts that had been plaguing him for months, about how he had started to dread his dates with Ashley because they felt like performances he was tired of giving. Quote 75. Kyle had explained, his head resting on Wayne's shoulder, his fingers tracing absent patterns on Wayne's chest. Quote 76. Quote 7. Wayne had said firmly, his hand stroking through Kyle's hair, "You were just looking in the wrong place." Was I? Kyle had asked, tilting his head to look up at Wayne. Because it feels like I've been looking for you my whole life without knowing it. The words had hit Wayne like a physical blow, so perfectly capturing his own feelings that for a moment he couldn't breathe. Quote 81. Quote what to say, Kyle had said, shifting so he could face Wayne more fully. Quoted Chairman. Wayne had kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of all the love he had been carrying in secret for so long. When they broke apart, Kyle's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I'm sorry it took me so long to figure this out," Kyle had whispered. "I'm sorry you had to wait for me to catch up." "You're worth waiting for," Wayne had said simply, and he had meant it with every fiber of his being. As the night had worn on, they had talked about practical things too, how to handle their living situation, whether to tell their friends immediately or take some time to adjust privately first, what this meant for Kyle's relationship with his family, who had always assumed he would settle down with a nice girl and give them grandchildren. Quote 87. Kyle had said with a rueful laugh, quote 8. Quote Isam, Wayne had said, and he had realized that the word "we" felt natural now, felt right in a way it never had before. Quote Net, Kyle had asked. Quote DeWine, Wayne had nodded. Quote Salmon, quote Nunchant, quote. Kyle had blushed at that, ducking his head against Wayne's shoulder in a way that was so endearing. Wayne felt his heart squeeze with affection. Eventually, exhaustion had started to creep in, but neither of them had wanted to break the spell of this new intimacy by retreating to their separate bedrooms. They had dozed fitfully on the couch, Kyle's head on Wayne's chest, Wayne's arms wrapped protectively around him. Wayne had woken first as dawn was beginning to creep through the windows, and for a moment he had panicked, wondering if the entire evening had been an elaborate dream. But then Kyle had stirred in his arms, pressing a sleepy kiss to his collarbone, and Wayne had known that this was real, that everything had changed in the most beautiful way possible. Quote 95. Kyle had mumbled, his voice rough with sleep. Quote 96. Wayne had replied, pressing a kiss to the top of Cassie's head. "How are you feeling?" Kyle had been quiet for a moment, as if taking inventory of his emotions. "Different. Good different. Like I finally know who I'm supposed to be." "And who is that?" Kyle had lifted his head to meet Wayne's eyes, and the smile that spread across his face had been radiant. 3 weeks later, Wayne stood in their kitchen making coffee, watching Kyle through the window as he sat on their small balcony, talking animatedly on the phone with his sister. The morning sun caught the highlights in Kyle's hair, and Wayne felt that familiar flutter in his chest that he now knew he would never grow tired of. The transition hadn't been without its challenges. Ashley had taken the news about as well as could be expected, which was to say she had cried, yelled, and then eventually admitted that she had sensed Kyle's heart wasn't fully in their relationship for months. Kyle's parents had needed some time to process, but they had ultimately come around, more concerned with their son's happiness than the gender of the person who provided it. Code one woman, his mother had said during a tearful phone call. Manu, stus. Their friends had been universally supportive, with several admitting they had suspected something was brewing between them for longer than either Wayne or Kyle had realized. Julie Chavez, Wayne's co-worker, had actually laughed when he told her, saying she had been wondering when they would finally figure it out. You two have been looking at each other like lovesick puppies for months, she had said. It was honestly painful to watch. The hardest part had been learning how to be together in all the ways they hadn't been before. Simple things like holding hands while watching television, or Kyle pressing a kiss to Wayne's cheek when he brought him coffee in the morning, felt both natural and revolutionary. They were still figuring out the rhythm of it, still discovering new ways to show affection, still marveling at the fact that they were allowed to want each other openly. Kyle finished his phone call and came back inside, sliding his arms around Wayne's waist from behind and resting his chin on his shoulder. So Kyle said, referring to his sister, quote one of Salon, boyfriend. The word still sent a thrill through Wayne every time he heard it. Quote one, Kyle said, pressing a kiss to the side of Wayne's neck that made him shiver. Because I have plans for you. Oh yeah, what kind of plans? The kind that involve us staying in bed for most of the day and ordering takeout for dinner. Wayne turned in Kyle's arms, looping his own around Kyle's neck. I like those plans. I thought you might, Kyle said, his eyes sparkling with mischief and affection in equal measure. They had been taking things slowly physically, both of them wanting to savor this new dimension of their relationship without rushing into anything Kyle wasn't ready for. But the intimacy they had built was deeper than anything Wayne had experienced before, built on a foundation of genuine friendship and understanding that made every kiss, every touch feel meaningful in a way that went beyond the physical. Quote 114, Kyle said suddenly, the words spilling out as if he couldn't contain them any longer. Wayne's heart stopped, then started again at double speed. They hadn't said those words yet, though Wayne had been feeling them for what seemed like forever. I love you too, he said, and watched Kyle's face light up like sunrise. Quote 81, quote 107, Kyle kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise. And Wayne thought about how strange it was that the best things in life often came disguised as ordinary moments. A simple request to watch a movie, a conversation that went deeper than intended, a kiss that changed everything. Kyle said when they broke apart, his forehead resting against Wayne's. What? That night when I asked if we could chill, I was so scared, so confused about everything I was feeling. I almost didn't knock on your door. What changed your mind? Kyle smiled, his hands coming up to cup Wayne's face. Quote 122, quote 123, quote 21. Wayne kissed him again, marveling at how right this felt, how perfectly Kyle fit in his arms, how natural it was to love him and be loved in return. Outside, the world continued its usual chaos, but here in their kitchen, wrapped in morning light and the scent of coffee and the warmth of Kyle's embrace, everything was exactly as it should be. So, Wayne said, echoing Kyle's words from that first night, quote 126, Kyle's smile was radiant, full of cheer and certainty and love. Now we figure it out together, one day at a time, one kiss at a time, one morning at a time. I like the sound of that, Wayne said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. They stood there in their kitchen, holding each other as the coffee finished brewing and the sun climbed higher in the sky. Two people who had found their way home in the most unexpected place. And Wayne understood, with a clarity that took his breath away, that sometimes the most beautiful love stories were the ones that caught you completely off guard, the ones that grew from friendship and trust and the courage to be honest about who you really were. Kyle pulled back just enough to meet his eyes, and Wayne saw his own wonder and gratitude reflected there. Thank you, Kyle said softly. For what? For being patient with me. For waiting while I figured myself out. For being brave enough to tell me the truth even when you thought it might ruin everything. Thank you for being worth waiting for, Wayne replied. Thank you for being brave enough to want something different. Thank you for choosing me. Always, Kyle said. And it sounded like a promise, like a vow, like the beginning of everything Wayne had ever wanted without knowing he was allowed to want it. They kissed again, slow and sweet and full of all the tomorrows stretching out ahead of them. And Wayne thought about how perfect it was that love could be both the most terrifying and the most natural thing in the world. How it could sneak up on you in the middle of an ordinary evening and change everything without changing anything at all. Because when he really thought about it, he had been in love with Kyle long before that night on the couch, long before the first kiss, long before Kyle had figured out that he was brave enough to want something different. The love had been there in every shared meal, every late night conversation, every moment of comfortable silence. The only thing that had changed was their courage to acknowledge it, to reach for it, to let it transform them both. Later that morning, as they sat curled together on the same couch where everything had started, Kyle's head in Wayne's lap, while Wayne read aloud from a book they had both been meaning to finish, Wayne reflected on the strange alchemy of timing and courage that had brought them to this moment. Read that part again, Kyle said, his eyes closed, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Which part? The part about finding home in unexpected places. Wayne found the passage and read it again, his voice soft in the morning quiet. Home isn't always a place, Pod, he read. Sometimes it's a person who sees you exactly as you are and loves you exactly as you are, who makes you feel like you can finally stop pretending and just be Barman. Kyle's smile widened, and he opened his eyes to look up at Wayne. Quote 113, quote Wishi, Wayne asked, his fingers threading through Kylie's hair. When I look back on it now, it feels like it was always leading here. Like every conversation, every shared moment was building toward this. Kyle considered this, his brow furrowing slightly in that way Wayne had come to love. Maybe that's how the best love stories work. They feel surprising in the moment, but inevitable in retrospect. Maybe, Wayne agreed, leaning down to press a soft kiss to Kyle's forehead. Quote 144 and quote 145, quote 146 down, Kyle shifted, turning so he could face Wayne more fully. Quote 47 and quote Wayne said firmly. Quote 40, quote 50, quote 21. Kyle reached up to trace the line of Wayne's jaw with gentle fingers. I'm glad you didn't give up hope. I'm glad you were brave enough to ask what you wanted that night. What do you think would have happened if I hadn't? If I had just gone to my room and tried to pretend everything was normal? Wayne considered this, though the thought made his chest tighten with something like retroactive panic. I think eventually one of us would have cracked. The feelings were too strong to ignore forever. But it might have taken longer. It might have. But we found our way here, and that's what matters. Kyle nodded, settling back against Wayne's lap with a contented sigh. Quote 158. Wayne continued reading, his voice a gentle murmur in the quiet apartment, and he thought about how domestic this felt. How right. This was what he had been missing in all his previous relationships. This sense of perfect compatibility, of being completely known and accepted. The book was a collection of essays about love and relationships, something Kyle had picked up on a whim weeks ago and had been slowly working through. Now, reading it together, Wayne found new meaning in passages that might have felt cliché before. When you were living inside your own love story, even the most ordinary words about love felt profound and personal. Quote 159. Wayne said, pausing at a particularly beautiful passage. Quote 160. Kyle's eyes had drifted closed again, but Wayne could see the soft smile that curved his lips. That's exactly how I feel about you, Kyle said without opening his eyes. Like you've been seeing the real me all along, even when I couldn't see it myself. Because I have been, Wayne said, his hand continuing its gentle movement through Kyle's hair. Oh, always charm, quote charm, as Kyle said, opening his eyes to meet Wayne's gaze. With Ashley, with all the girls I dated, I was trying to be the person I thought they wanted. With you, I can just be myself. You've always been yourself with me. That's why I fell in love with you in the first place. As the afternoon wore on, they talked about their plans for the future, both immediate and distant. Kyle wanted to introduce Wayne to his college friends when they came to visit next month. Wayne wanted to take Kyle home to meet his parents over the holidays. They discussed redecorating their apartment, making it feel more intentionally theirs rather than just a convenient shared space. I want to get a bigger couch, Kyle said, stretching out so his feet were in Wayne's lap. So die job boy 100 quote the evidence how quote one and Wayne understood completely. There was something appealing about the idea of creating new traditions, new memories that belonged entirely to this version of themselves. Quote 172. Wayne suggested, quote washer, quote washer, and quote one to Michato. Kyle grinned. Quote Wayne. The picture Kyle painted was so appealing, so perfectly ordinary and extraordinary at the same time, that Wayne felt his heart swell with affection. Quote Washington, quote Wenham. They spent the rest of the afternoon in comfortable domesticity, cooking together, sharing stories about their weeks, existing in the easy intimacy they had built. Wayne marveled at how natural it all felt, how seamlessly they had transitioned from friends to something more without losing any of the foundation that had made their friendship special in the first place. Quote 179. Kyle said as they worked together to prepare lunch, Kyle chopping vegetables while Wayne stirred a sauce on the stove. Quote weighty, quote what is Jean. Wayne paused in his stirring to look at Kyle, taking in the relaxed set of his shoulders, the easy smile on his face, the way he moved around their kitchen like he belonged there completely. Quote 182. Quote what then? The question was asked casually, but Wayne could hear the underlying vulnerability in it, the way Kyle was still testing the waters of this new reality. Quote one down, Wayne asked gently. Kyle set down his knife and turned to face Wayne fully, his expression serious and thoughtful. Quote one down hated him. Quote what so Wayne said, reaching out to cup Kyle's face in his hands. This is love. They kissed in their kitchen, surrounded by the sense of cooking food and the warm afternoon light streaming through their windows. And Wayne thought about how perfect it was that love could be found in the most ordinary moments, in the simple act of preparing a meal together, in the quiet certainty of choosing each other again and again. As evening approached, they found themselves back on the couch, this time with no pretense of watching anything, just enjoying each other's company. Kyle had his head on Wayne's shoulder, their fingers intertwined, and Wayne felt a peace he had never experienced before. Can I tell you something? Kyle said, his voice soft in the growing darkness. Always. That night when I knocked on your door, I was so scared of what I was feeling. But underneath the fear was this tiny voice telling me that maybe, just maybe, you felt the same way. What made you think that? Kyle was quiet for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. Little things, the way you looked at me sometimes when you thought I wasn't paying attention, the way you always made sure I had eaten when I was stressed about work, the way you listened to me complain about Ashley without ever making me feel stupid for staying with her. I never wanted you to feel stupid. I just wanted you to be happy. I know, and I think part of me knew that you would be happy if I was happy, even if it wasn't with you. But there was another part that hoped maybe you wanted me to be happy with you specifically. Wayne pressed a kiss to the top of Kyle's head. What 195 and quote 196 for quote 197. Kyle tilted his head to look up at Wayne, and in the soft lamplight, his eyes were warm and full of love. Quote demise, quote Tushwananen. Wayne considered the question seriously. A few months ago, he might have been more skeptical, more inclined to attribute relationships to compatibility and timing rather than destiny. But looking at Kyle, thinking about the way they had found their way to each other, despite all the obstacles and misunderstandings and fear, it was hard not to believe in something larger than coincidence. Quote 201, he said finally. Quote 202, Kyle's smile was radiant. I believe that too. They kissed then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Wayne thought about how much had changed since that night 3 weeks ago when Kyle had knocked on his door looking lost and uncertain. Now Kyle looked settled, grounded, like he had finally found his place in the world. What are you thinking about? Kyle asked when they broke apart. Just how different everybody is now, how much better. Better how? Wayne thought about how to articulate the profound shift that had occurred, not just in their relationship, but in how he moved through the world. I used to feel like I was holding my breath all the time, waiting for something I couldn't name. Now I feel like I can finally breathe. That's exactly it, Kyle said, his voice full of recognition. I feel like I've been living in black and white my whole life, and now suddenly everything is in color. Cheesy, Wayne said with a grin. But true, Kyle replied, not at all embarrassed. I don't care if it's cheesy. I'm allowed to be cheesy about the person I love. The casual way Kyle said the person I love sent warmth flooding through Wayne's chest. He was still getting used to being loved openly, to being someone's person in return. I love you too, Wayne said, because he couldn't hear those words without responding, without making sure Kyle knew that the feeling was mutual and overwhelming and permanent. Goodbye, Kill said, settling more comfortably against Wayne's side. I can feel it. In the way you look at me, in the way you touch me, in the way you make coffee, just the way I like it without me having to ask. You notice that? I notice everything about you. I always have. I just didn't let myself think about what it meant. They fell into comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts, but anchored to each other by touch and presence. Wayne found himself thinking about the future, about all the ordinary moments they would share, all the ways they would continue to discover each other. Wayne, Kyle said eventually. Yeah? Thank you for being patient with me, for letting me figure this out at my own pace. Thank you for figuring it out at all. Thank you for being brave enough to want this. I couldn't not want this, not once I let myself really consider the possibility. Wayne understood exactly what Kyle meant. Once the door had been opened, once they had acknowledged what was between them, there had been no going back to pretending it didn't exist. As the night deepened around them, they talked about smaller things, everyday concerns and plans and observations. Kyle told him about a project at work that was exciting him, a new campaign for a local nonprofit that would let him use his graphic design skills for something meaningful. Wayne shared a funny story about his encounter with their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, in the hallway, who had apparently been wondering when they were going to, quote, 223, quote, 224, quote. Kale laughed, his eyes bright with amusement. Quote, they debated what to have for dinner, eventually settling on ordering from their favorite Thai place. It was all beautifully mundane, exactly the kind of evening they might have shared as friends, but infused now with a new layer of intimacy and belonging. Wayne realized that this was what he had been missing in all his previous relationships. This sense of being completely comfortable with another person, of being able to exist together without needing constant entertainment or stimulation. Quote, Tishawis, Kyle said, echoing Wayne's thoughts. What is? This, just being together, not having to perform or pretend or try to be someone I'm not. You never had to pretend with me. I know, that's what made it so scary and so perfect at the same time. When their food arrived, they ate curled together on the couch, sharing dishes and feeding each other bites of their favorites. It was intimate in a way that had nothing to do with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, everything to do with the small kindnesses and considerations that made up a real relationship. I could get used to this, Kyle said, stealing a piece of Wayne's pad thai. After dinner, they cleaned up together, moving around their small kitchen with an ease that came from months of cohabitation, but felt different now, more intentional. Wayne found himself cataloging these small moments, storing them away like treasures. Kyle asked as they finished loading the dishwasher. Wayne looked at him, taking in the soft expression on his face, the way the kitchen light caught the gold flecks in his eyes, the easy way he stood in their shared space like he belonged there completely. Quote 237, Wayne said. Quote to 238. Kyle smiled, and Wayne thought about how true that was, how they had moved from the desperate urgency of new love into something more sustainable and enduring. They had time to figure everything out, time to grow together, time to build the kind of relationship that lasted. Quote 239, Kyle said, quote, quote, they made their way to Wayne's bedroom, the larger of the two, which had become their unofficial shared space over the past few weeks. Kyle had gradually migrated more and more of his belongings there, until it felt like their room rather than Wayne's room that Kyle visited. They got ready for bed with the comfortable routine they had developed. brushing their teeth side by side at the bathroom sink, Kyle stealing Wayne's toothpaste and Wayne pretending to be annoyed. It was domestic and ordinary and wonderful. In bed, they curled together naturally, Kyle's head on Wayne's chest, Wayne's arms wrapped around him protectively. The position had become their default, the way they both slept best. Quote 242, Kyle said into the darkness. Quote on, quote harness, quote trossen, quote learns. Wayne pressed a kiss to the top of Kyle's head, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo. I know exactly what you mean. Do you think it will always feel like this? Like what? Like we're exactly where we're supposed to be. Like everything finally makes sense. Wayne considered the question seriously. He knew that relationships evolved, that the intense euphoria of new love would eventually settle into something deeper and more complex. But he also knew that what he felt for Kyle went beyond infatuation or novelty, rooted as it was in genuine friendship and understanding. I think it will feel different as time goes on, he said honestly. But I think the core of it, the rightness of it, that will always be there. I hope so. I know so. Kyle was quiet for a while, and Wayne thought he might have fallen asleep. But then he spoke again, his voice soft and drowsy. I love our life together. Our life together. I like the sound of that. Good, because you're stuck with me now. Wayne smiled into the darkness. I can think of worse fates. Like what? Like spending the rest of my life wondering what it would have been like to be with you. Kyle lifted his head to look at Wayne, even though they could barely see each other in the dim room. Well, now you know. Now I know. And it's even better than I imagined. Kyle settled back against Wayne's chest with a contented sigh. Quote 265, quote to us, and they drifted off to sleep like that, wrapped around each other, secure in the knowledge that they had found something rare and precious and worth fighting for. And Wayne understood, in that drowsy space between waking and sleeping, that sometimes the most beautiful love stories were the ones that began with a simple question, a moment of vulnerability, a willingness to risk everything for the possibility of something real. In the morning, he knew, they would wake up together and make coffee and plan their day and continue building the life they had discovered they both wanted. But for now, it was enough to hold Kyle close and listen to his breathing slow into sleep, to feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against his chest, to know that they had found their way home to each other at last. Outside, the world continued its usual chaos and uncertainty, but here in their bed, in their apartment, in the circle of each other's arms, everything was exactly as it should be. They were exactly where they belonged, exactly who they were meant to be, together.